Especially good to have Elizabeth and Chris with us. I was trying to think of when Chris became a Christian. I know both of them have been Christians for a long time, but I was baptised in 75, and I think Chris might have been already around at that stage, or close to it anyway.
I was 20, so that would have been 82.
Oh, okay. Not too much longer. But anyways, they've both been members of the church for a long time. To me, that's a really encouraging thing when people stick with it. You know, it's easy to become a Christian and a lot of enthusiasm, and then when things don't go quite the way you expect in them, you give up. But it's just great to have an association with people who really are long-term faithful Christians no matter what. Okay, we've been studying 1 Thessalonians. We were in chapter 4, but I hadn't got the sermon to the point that I wanted it to be at. So we're going to look at something different. Hopefully we'll do that one next week. What I want to talk about is defilement. Kind of a funny word. We don't use it very often. But the New Testament and the Old Testament very definitely talks about defilement, both physically and spiritually. It was much more a physical thing in the Old Testament. It's more a spiritual thing in the New Testament. But we're just going to have a look at that. 1 Corinthians 7 and verse 1, therefore, since we have these promises, notice it's referring to Christians. We have these promises. So this applies to Christians. Dear friends, let us cleanse ourselves from all defilement of body and spirit, accomplishing holiness in the fear of God. So we have these promises, talking to Christians. Let us cleanse ourselves. Let us get rid of all defilement of body and spirit. We became a Christian when we committed our life to Christ and were baptized. But really this passage is telling me that that's just the beginning of the journey. When we are baptized, we rise up with the forgiveness of sins. God credits us, if you like, with having a pure life and having no sins against our name. But part of our commitment to being a Christian is that we determine to try and become, in actual fact, what Christ has made us spiritually because of our baptism. It says, cleanse ourselves. We're already Christians in this passage, but we are to work at cleansing ourselves from all defilement of body, probably more talking about the physical things that we do. And I'm not going to refer to them. That's not my concentration on this passage. So cleanse ourselves from all defilement of body and spirit. And the spirit here is the thinking processes. So what he's telling us to do is not only not do things that are wrong as far as God is concerned physically, but actually to control our thinking so we don't even think about those things. Or if we are thinking about them, we're thinking about them in the correct way, in a godly way. Notice he says accomplishing. I think we're all on different roads, different stages to this. You don't say you're an accomplished something unless you're very, very good at it. He's an accomplished violinist. Or another word is commonly used, he's a master violinist. He's achieved mastery. And apparently mastery in general takes about 10,000 practice hours to achieve it. So we are to keep going in this process of cleansing ourselves until, if you like, we've achieved it, we've achieved mastery of it. We're very, very good at it. So we've accomplished, what is it we're trying to accomplish? Holiness in the fear of God. In other words, our whole life is not only devoted to being what God wants us to be, but we've actually accomplished it to a very large extent. We're not to give up until we reach that stage. Now, I want to concentrate more on one particular type of, if you like, defilement. Matthew 15:11. It is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person. Under the Old Testament, they could eat certain foods and there's other foods they're not allowed to eat. If they ate pork, which I don't understand at all, not being allowed to eat pork, but evidently, if they ate it, they would be defiled. And there's other insects and different birds, fish, whatever, that they weren't allowed to eat. So Jesus is saying this doesn't apply. In Christianity, this food is not what defiles a person. And there he's talking food in general, what goes into the mouth. What we eat probably encompasses drink as well. But what comes out of the mouth, this defiles a person. And obviously what he's talking about by talking about what comes out of the mouth, he's talking about what we actually say. Because there's a lot of other passages we're going to look at, which talks about the words that we use in our communication to each other, those outside the church, etc. Those are what, in a sense, defile us. He makes it a bit more specific in the next group of passages that I want to look at. Now, I'm sure you've heard the passage or the term a key indicator. What's it called? The Reserve Bank has various key indicators that they look at before they decide to raise or lower interest rates or change the amount you can borrow, whatever that's called, against property, etc. A key indicator is something that you look at that determines something else that exists. I think here what Jesus is saying is the key indicator to the real state of our heart is the words that we use. Whether we've got a pure heart, whether we've got a soiled heart, whether we've got an angry heart, whatever it is, an unfaithful heart, an ungrateful heart, the key indicator of that condition of our heart, meaning our thinking processes, is what comes out of our mouth, are the words that we use. Okay, let's have a look at Matthew 12, verse 33 through 37. He says, either make the tree good and its fruit is good, or make the tree bad and its fruit is bad. For the tree is known by its fruit. Now, I used to get a little bit hung up on the idea of what is a bad tree, what's bad fruit. That's not really important. It's a general principle he's trying to get across here. He says what the whole thing that he's trying to get at is the tree is known by its fruit. What does the fruit supply? It supplies apples. I'm not a horticulturalist, so I don't know what constitutes a bad apple. I think in this case it's not really a rotten apple, because that's the person doing the harvester's problem. But there are trees evidently that, they're all spotted, or I don't know what it is. But the whole point is, when you look at a tree, it's the fruit you get off it, which is why in general you grow on a fruit tree, that determines whether that tree is worth keeping or not. So a tree is known by its fruit. Obviously he's doing this for a purpose. He's not trying to teach us about horticulture, he's trying to teach us about the use of language. And that's verse 34. He says, offspring of vipers, talking about the Jewish authorities. And this is a very, very strong statement that Jesus is making. We would say you shouldn't be so judgmental. But Jesus knew what he was doing. This was an accurate statement of what these guys were. Another term we might use is he is rotten to the core. How are you able to say good things when you are evil? In other words, really what he's saying is what they're saying is not good, because at the root they're not good. They look good, they sound good, they're trying to impress people with the words they use, but fundamentally the words are bad because their heart is bad. We know most of what these Jewish authorities were saying was to try and discredit Jesus in some way, which is the ultimate evil we can say. Now notice he says, for or because from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So from the abundance of the tree, the fruit appears. For us, from the abundance of the heart, the state of our heart, the condition of our thinking, the mouth speaks. For the good person from his good treasures brings out good things. And the evil person from his evil treasures brings out evil things. Again, he's illustrating what he's trying to say. If your storehouse is filled with evil stuff, when you go and get stuff and bring it out, you'll bring out evil stuff. Guns, knives, whatever it is. But if your storehouse is full of good things, maybe gold, maybe beautiful things, maybe things everyone loves and admires for good reasons, then that's what you've got to draw on. If our heart is full of bad stuff, what we've got to draw on, which is represented by what we will say, will be evil. You can't get good stuff from bad source. That's what he's saying. But I tell you that every worthless word that they speak, people will give an account for it on the day of judgment. So now he narrows it down a little bit more. The words themselves that we use may be held against us, if necessary, on the day of judgment. But notice he narrows it down to even a single word. But I tell you that every worthless word that they speak, people will give an account for it on the day of judgment. That's how important what we say, the words we use, is in terms of the condition of our heart. Verse 37, for by your words you will be vindicated, and by your words you will be condemned. So what he's saying is the key indicator to the state of our heart are the words that we use. So I think he's kind of saying two things. He says you want to stop using bad words, but even behind that, you've got to get your heart in the right state if you're to be acceptable to God. Defilement is that which, if you like, incorporates something in our life which is unacceptable to God. Now I want to look at a section, what I've called types of words that defile. Ephesians 5, 1 through 6. Therefore, become imitators of God as beloved children, and live in love, just as also Christ loved us and gave himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a fragrant smell. Paul often uses these ideas. We live a particular way because of what God has done for us already. We're talking about motivation in the class. How can you say no to God? No, I'm not going to bother doing that when you see what God has already done for you. That's the motivation involved. So when he's asking us to clean up our language, clean up our speech, the reason we should do that is what God has already done for us. In business terms, it's called the law of reciprocity. You know, you want someone to buy something from you, you give them a little present first. And then you're hoping that softened them up and you can get them to buy a big thing off you. You know, pretty typical way of people do businesses. But that's exactly what's going on here. God proved his value to us by doing this first, then he asks us to do what he wants us to do. So verse 3, but sexual immorality and all uncleanness or godliness must not even be named among you, as is fitting for saints. Now verse 4, and obscenity and foolish talk or coarse jesting, which are not proper, but rather thanksgiving. For this you know for certain, that every sexually immoral person or unclean person or greedy person who is an idolater does not have an inheritance in the kingdom of God. Let no one deceive you with empty words. For because of these things, the wrath of God is coming on the sons of disobedience. Now, the sons of disobedience there, I think, are not talking about those outside the church. Because in the beginning he says, become imitators of God. He's talking about Christians. So that the disobedient are those who are, even as Christians, not doing what God wants them to do. Notice verse 4, 3 types of language that's not permitted, if you like, and one that is encouraged or permitted. Obscenity, foolish talk, coarse jesting. Now, if you look at the definitions of these, I know they're probably pretty obvious, but the first one, obscenity, is an act in defiance or language in defiance of social and moral standards. not only talking about sexual activity. It's talking about encouraging others to, if you like, to be involved in moral conduct or different activities that is not acceptable, and that to a large extent is to do with the society that you live in. Not necessarily an absolute. In some areas, people aren't offended in any way by talking about particular things. In other areas, they're mortally offended. One that I was taught early on, if you went to the States, you shouldn't call a bathroom a toilet. Because in some areas of the state, they don't like that at all. That's offensive language. It doesn't worry me entirely, because that's what language we use at home. It doesn't offend anybody here. But the idea here is language that will socially offend rather people that you're dealing with. That certainly involves sexual language in a lot of cases, but it does involve other things as well. And then notice it says, with resulting disgrace, embarrassment, and shame. Okay, foolish talk. Talk which is both foolish and stupid. That one's pretty obvious. We'll look at that a little bit more a bit later on. And coarse jesting. Coarse jesting involving vulgar expressions and indecent content. More to do with the sexual side of things in that case. Okay, Ephesians 5 verse 3, but sexually immoral and all unclean or greedy must not be named among you. So these ones, to us, pretty obvious. These things are bad. We all know that early on from being a Christian. But then verse 4, he combines this other type language, obscenity, foolish talk, and coarse jesting. Some of that's related to sexual, some of it's not. Foolish talk is not, in general. One possible definition of foolish talk is waffle. Just saying whatever comes out of the mouth. It doesn't matter what you say, you just got to say something and it's waffle. You know, I've been accused of waffling. And I remember a particular girl I was trying to chat up, she just, "You're waffling, John." didn't get anywhere. Anyway, so, you know, we're not just talking about telling dirty jokes or something like that. It's the way we use our language. So for this, you know for certain that every sexually immoral person or unclean person or greedy person who is that does not have an inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. So in other words, if we use language that's not fit for us as Christians, he is putting it pretty straight, does not have an inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Putting a lot of emphasis on the need for us to be very careful about the language we use. Doesn't mean we should never say anything unless we've got something really significant to say. But it does mean we have to be careful about the language we use. Let no one, notice, deceive you with empty words. Empty words there, kind of comparable in a sense to foolish words, but in this case, it's talking about words that say you can do something when in fact you're not allowed to do that. Okay? Let no one deceive you with empty words. What's the deception? For because of this, these things rather, the wrath of God is coming on the sons of disobedience. Don't anyone tell you different from what I've just been telling you. These empty words are really incorrect words, words that are not true, words that are encouraging you to do something that actually God has told you you shouldn't do. They're empty because they're not true. They may sound good. They may impress a lot of people. We were in a situation on the week and we were at a sort of a meeting for a particular reason. I won't tell you what it was, but there was a group of people kind of, there were quips going from one side of the room to the other. And the people that were there were laughing and thinking this is hilarious and carrying on and joke, you know, it's just, they were obviously really enjoying. I had no idea what they were talking about. And I don't know how to reply. When you don't know what they're saying in the first place, what do you say back? I don't know. You know, that's kind of the idea there. It means nothing. These words are just empty. They're nothing. which emphasizes the importance that we use our language in a significant way. Okay, let's go on. Ephesians 4 and verse 29 uses a more general term, no rotten word. You could argue about what's rotten. There's obviously the fruit image there. But words that are not effective for what they're supposed to be used for. No rotten word must proceed from your mouth, but only something good for the building up of the need, in order that it may give grace to those who hear. So, no rotten words. This is the way you should use words in the second part. But only something good for the building up of the need. In other words, we're to use our language to help accomplish something in a particular area, especially to do good in that particular area. Dee's got some sort of a problem. What do I do? Straighten up, Dee. Harden up, woman. You know, how's that going to help? I should use this gift of language we have to try and help her overcome whatever that problem is. Not that she needs it. I'm just using that as an example. But notice we should be using it for the building up of the need. We all need to go to heaven. We're to use our language to help each other go to heaven. Maybe sometimes we need more strength in certain situations that we're struggling with. Those who are strong ought to use those language to help those people get through that problem. Words are a tremendously powerful force. I know I grew up with the idea that sticks and stones may hurt my bones, but words can never hurt me. That's absolutely not true. Words are tremendously powerful in our life. They can make us or they can break us. We need to use our words to make each other, in order that it may give grace or give kindness, if you want to put it that way, to those who hear. We're to help one another with our words, and we can help one another with our words. So no rotten words must proceed from our mouth. Okay, 2 Peter 2, 18 through 19. This is another type of words that he's talking about. By speaking high-sounding but empty words, we can sometimes use very highfalutin, very impressive sounding language, but it doesn't actually in the end do anything. Sometimes we can go to a meeting or talk to someone and we really feel good about that association with them. But when we leave, we had no idea what was going on there. I've walked out of a lot of sales meetings and you feel great and you really want to do what they're asking you to do, but you get down the road and it all dies. Or someone can sound very impressive, especially as a religious leader. They can sound very impressive, but really they're leading you away from what God wants you to do, not towards it. So high-sounding but empty words. They entice with desires of the flesh and with licentiousness, which are scarcely escaping from those who live in error. So the language they use is designed to stimulate us in particular areas, but those areas are bad for us. And 2 Peter 2:19, promising them freedom, or they themselves are slaves of depravity. Yes, you can do that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But if you know the Bible, you know it is wrong. Promising them freedom. Yes, you have the freedom to do whatever you want. But in fact, we don't. But you can generate the language to convince people that what you are doing is okay. For to whatever someone succumbs by this, he is also enslaved. Okay, 1 Peter 3, 8 through 12, passage I really love. And finally, all of you be harmonious, sympathetic, showing mutual affection, compassionate, humble, not repaying evil for evil or insult for insult. All of this relates very much to the words we use for each other. But on the other hand, blessing others. Because for this reason you were called. God called us as Christians, and one of the specific reasons he did that was call us to use our language in a way that builds up and encourages, not drags down, so that you could inherit a blessing. If you're willing to bless others, God is willing to bless you. That's kind of the idea there. Now notice this. As I've said before, inherently we're selfish. But we express our selfish correctly by being unselfish towards others. Ultimately, I want to go to heaven. And one of the routes to being able to, for me to go to heaven is to be unselfish towards others. So if we look at it from a social point of view, what's the point of making the effort to do what I've been talking about? 1 Peter 3 and verse 10. The one who wants to love life, and who doesn't? For the one who wants to love life and see good days must keep his tongue from evil, and his lips must not speak deceit. So if you want to enjoy life, control your tongue. That's what he's saying. And he must turn away from evil and do good. He must seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous. If you want God to bless you, you've got to control the tongue. And his ears are open to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. The group of people who are described as doing evil here includes those who do not control the tongue. James 1:26. If anyone thinks he is religious, although he does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religious is worthless. If as a Christian you don't control your tongue, your Christianity is not doing you any good at all. It's a waste of time being a Christian. That's really what he's saying. Again, very strong language. I want to sum up by just reading this final passage. Matthew 15 verses 18 through 20. But the things that come out of the mouth come from the heart, and these defile the person. So what the central point at which we can defile ourselves or make ourselves unacceptable to God is the words we use, but that's because that represents the condition of our heart. Ultimately, it's the condition of our heart. But you can't separate the condition of our heart from the words that we use. For from the heart comes evil plans, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, abuse of speech. These are the things that defile a person. But eating with unwashed hands does not defile a person. If we truly want to be acceptable to God, we need to manage the tongue. We need to use the tongue in the way God intended it to be used. And then we will be acceptable. Then that will work towards our being acceptable to God. Okay, thank you.